Hi, I'm Charlotte, coming to you from my studio in Stillwater, Minnesota. With the pandemic shutting down so many shows and also the studio crawl I'm usually in, I thought it was time for me to enter the 21st century and bring my studio to you. So in this video, I'll be showing you a tour of my studio and explaining my process, what I go through to make a painting, and then a tour of many of my paintings. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to turn the camera around now and we'll get going. Over the years, I've made a number of workstations in this large area that I've gotten to take over. And this one is where I do the business part of my art business. You can see the shelving units hold not only my supplies and books, but the black boxes are full of photos that I've taken over the years, traveling near and far. And they're a great source of reference material as I compose my paintings. Down there is my travel box full of drawing and painting supplies ready to go. Over here is the station where I like to do drawing and watercolor studies, as I either do them just as a watercolor I want to do or to prepare for the painting. Moving along here, here's the area where I do the pastel and acrylic paintings that you're going to see shortly as you get the virtual tour through my artwork. This easel is awesome because it can fold back in the middle to be totally horizontal, which helps me to control the flow of paint and to do various techniques that require a horizontal position. I like to work in this format where I'm surrounded by the materials that I need, that I can grab, have them ready to go. Right down here I have the pastels that I use to sketch out my paintings. And over the years I've developed more and more use of the pastels, taking it to the completed stage and not even delving into my acrylics. I've got a painting that is sketched up and ready to go, so I thought I'd show you the process that I go through when I'm preparing to do an artwork. See if I can zoom in here. The first thing I do is find the scene. And here's a 3 photos that I've taped together when I was in Montana last summer. Everything was so lush and gorgeous at that point. And actually, this photograph went to the left and the right in a great big panoramic view. But as I looked it over and thought, where's the picture that I want to paint? It kind of came down to these elements. So that's what I'm going to start out with. And so back to this, you can see I do, first of all, a small black and white pencil sketch where I figure out the darks and the lights and the landlines, and then the watercolor study helps me figure out my palette. When I go finally then to the big canvas, I sketch it out with pastels, and throughout this process, even though I've done this, I'm not cemented into it, and I'm not cemented into that image. The goal is to get the feel of that by the end, but I've already made changes on here. I've broadened the area in the land mass, and I'm going to be pushing back those mountains in the back and the big tree mass in the top left, because the photo didn't do justice to the depth that was there. That is something that I'll have to put in as I paint. So at some point, this will be finished and it'll be on my website. Hopefully a success. Moving around the studio, I've got areas for storing large papers. Here I can store canvases ready to be used for painting and a lot of my finished paintings. This is a multi-purpose area where I can stretch canvases, do the final varnishing. I also use it to cut down stretcher bars to the size that I want. So it's just great to have this space. Here are 2 examples of some other potential paintings where you see the photo references, the things that attracted me that I found while I was out photographing, and what it might possibly end up to be. I've done so many of these. I have a pile of them, and who knows when I'll ever get to them all. I have a large closet that runs the width of the studio, so lots of storage space. On this wall you can see that I've got, here's just one example of a color study. Having done them has been really informative for me as I figure out how to mix colors and the differences that occur when you mix with the different neutrals and complements. Here's my water source, and here is my secondary easel where I put the latest painting that I like to just leave sitting there for a couple of weeks. Clears my mind to come back into the studio and see it fresh, to see if there's something that's just aggravating me or that I think really needs fixing before I photograph it and varnish it and put it out there for the world to see. So, still thinking on this one. Some more color studies. So, this has been a tour of my studio, a really quick one. Wish I could have you here in person because the conversations that I got to have with friends and with new people coming in that I'd never met before is a lost opportunity right now. Hope to see you here in my studio in person someday. You take care. The first three images here show how water creates patterns through its usually endless movement. Every brush stroke I painted needed to be placed correctly to not stop the flow visually. The water in Duct is in relatively shallow water. The water was quite serene, so the reflections really became a major point of interest, as well as all of the interesting sailboats. Showing water rushing and crashing against rocks, coastlines, and vegetation creates a wide variety of patterns and colors also. The color of water is greatly influenced by so many factors that I often paint the land underneath first and then the water in its action. To get different effects, especially in waterfalls and fountains, I do a lot of splatter techniques that involve things like 91% isopropyl alcohol, water, and the paint itself in a variety of viscosities, as well as different acrylic mediums that I've experimented with. I keep a spray bottle of water nearby also to help direct the flow of the paint as needed. In the painting With Water Comes Growth, showing the waterfall in its habitat was really important. The different features like the dead branch with its shadow, the rock structures, and the live tree all were equal partners, showing this as cohabitants in close relationship to each other. The painting The Kelp Forest was magical to see at the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California. I felt like I was spying on a hidden and foreign country that I was able to visit without getting suited up and wet. To realize that underwater there exists an entire ecosystem as large as what we have here on land is pretty mesmerizing and amazing. Water is really moody. It reflects the sky, and it's affected by wind-producing currents, temperature in the air, fluctuations with the seasons, the colors of the seasons. Sometimes the water and sky are so close in color you have to squint and stare until you can see that subtle line that's the horizon. Painting that really requires some nuanced color shifts and smooth paint handling. The last three images in this section show water from a closer view. While quite realistically handled, they have an abstract quality when viewed from a distance. I think if the viewer has to ask, what is that? It's a good thing. It makes a person look closer and find in their mind that example or experience that helps them relate to the image. And this is probably different for every person who's looking. While skies almost always play some role in my landscapes, it was the main center of interest in these next four paintings. The clouds and the colors in the sky are almost always fleeting with constant movement, cloud shape, color, and value shifts. Freezing a skyscape into a painting and not making it look plastic or fake really requires a different kind of brushstroke with some constant attention to blending of colors, shifting the values, and softening the edges. I almost always have two large paintbrushes in my hands when I'm painting skies. I find I need one for the bottom of the clouds and the interior area, and then one for the top edges, because the two different brushes really will end up having two different colors and values of those colors on them. Also, when the skies are this dramatic, they impact the land or watercolors and values dramatically too. So the colors that are in the sky need to show up in the land, and actually the colors on the land show up in the sky too. So there's a back and forth attention that has to happen. I've seen some skies that were so colorful or cloud busy that I thought no one would believe me if I painted that. A rule of thumb among artists actually is, just because you saw it doesn't mean you should paint it. I felt these skies, though, were not only memorable, but also believable, so I painted them. When I travel, I photograph extensively, and when I'm back home, I create photo files for my use later. Some paintings are a combination of several photos, but I always use care to maintain that sense of place that I saw at that site. All of my paintings start out being sketched with pastels directly onto the canvas with a shift over to acrylics. In the last few years, through experimenting with some acrylic mediums as a fixative, I've actually been able to do the entire painting with pastels only, which is interesting because pastels create a very different textural quality. This is an ongoing technique that I'm exploring. When I compose a landscape, I work to have 4 or 5 areas of interest that all work together to create that strong sense of place and that invitation to step inside the work and stay a while. In the 7th painting here, Wicklow Mountain Scenic View in Ireland, I think you can see what I mean as this view, which was on the way up to the Sally Gap, takes your eye from that fence post right in front of you to many miles in the distance. There are some basic understandings about what the air does to colors, shapes, and details the farther away that things like a forest, mountains, etc. sit in the composition. Creating that sense of atmosphere adds to making a scene with many elements work successfully. Some other elements I enjoy painting, and inspired by artists like Andrew Wyeth and the Dutch artist Louis Bousman, are the dense vegetation such as grasses, trees, branches, leaves, and flowers. The patterns created by these thick masses make strong compositions that I enjoy painting in a lot of detail. As a painter of realism, I do look for those areas where I can simplify. But if I want to make something like grasses, for example, pull you in and make you feel the wind blowing over them, I always opt out for painting them stroke after stroke. You might have noticed some of my paintings are titled Somewhere. I've done 5 of them so far. I'm not trying to be tricky. These are just places where the beauty of them was the message and not the where. The last 2 paintings in this section include architectural elements that helped to showcase the specific lighting and shadow effects that I liked and wanted to capture. When I do a floral painting, there are some flowers that I can identify, but mostly I really don't care about that. In this first painting, though, Poppy Bloom, I do recognize the flower. The orange bursts of color travel the eye from up front and close and deep into the distance. Here's an example where I simplified some of the areas. The grasses, trees, and the landlines become more loosely handled as these shapes move higher and deeper up into the distance. In the next 3 images, there are numerous layers to dissect visually. If you start with the most obvious top layer and look beyond that, you can see another layer, and then another, and another. There's a complexity there that I notice, and I enjoy creating those when I paint. The point of my flowers is a celebration of colors, textures, foliage, etc., that I hope radiate a sense of well-being. Here in Minnesota, the flowers signal the end of winter and the promise of warm days to come. They really seem like, to me, a gift from nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson said it really well, too. He said, "The earth laughs in flowers." I agree with that. Some of the pieces in this section are smaller works that were created or started on site as plein air works. Some were done to explore a subject to see what I wanted to do with it before I went on to a large canvas. As they progressed, I decided to complete them as individual works, not just as a loose study. Cactus in Mexican pottery is a watercolor that I did while on vacation. Traveling with a watercolor kit is so much more doable than with a large canvas panel. Painting on a smaller scale also helps me practice brushwork skills. Several of these pieces are mixed media that include gouache and ink. The 2 pencil drawings here started as on-site plein air sketches that I finished later in the studio. I've heard them called plenudios. Going back to drawing fundamentals is a good practice that always puts me in a quiet zone. Andrew Wyeth said, I love the quality of pencil. It helps me get to the core of a thing. I agree with him on that. Since I always photograph my finished paintings, I have created photo-reproduced images for greeting cards. The cards come boxed in sets of 8 different images that are all blank inside. I currently have 3 different sets available here. The 8x8-inch photos are mounted on cradle board and framed with a 1/2-inch natural pine trim. You only see a few examples here, but actually all of my square format paintings are available in this form. These come with a hanger and are ready to hang. Thank you for joining me here. I look forward to the day we can safely visit face to face. My price list is on my website at charlottesschuld.com, and I can be contacted via email at csart51@gmail.com. Please note, 10% of all sales will be donated to Second Harvest Heartland. If you enjoyed the tour, please forward this link to your friends and family. Stay well, everyone, and bye for now.